The North Sea oil rig explosion. Calamities Lesson 13. The North Sea waters unusually calm around the Piper Alpha oil platform that July evening. Most of the 227 workers were off duty in their cabins, but several dozen men were still outside. They were monitoring the rig, which continued to pump oil from the seafloor. As far as the men knew, everything was operating normally. But deep beneath the sea, a terrible tragedy was building. Every worker on an offshore oil platform knows how dangerous the job can be. In case of an emergency, the sea is the only escape. The Piper Alpha platform was a huge oil rig located in the North Sea, 120 miles off the Scottish coast. It began operating in 1976, and by 1988 it was one of the oldest oil platforms in the North Sea. Every day it produced 140,000 barrels of crude oil, as well as some natural gas. The Piper Alpha and other platforms like it were an important part of Great Britain's oil industry. The North Sea is rich in oil, but it is also cold and dangerous. It is famous for its violent storms, so oil platforms must be strong enough to stand the weather. And despite a fire in 1984, the Piper Alpha had the reputation of being strong and safe. The massive steel structure loomed 200 feet above the rough water, and it was attached to the seafloor 500 feet below the surface. The entire rig weighed 34,000 tons. From the Piper Alpha, workers could see that Tharnos anchored nearby. That ship was permanently assigned to the oil platform. On board was emergency fire and rescue equipment, just in case the Piper Alpha ever needed help. But the people on the rig were also prepared. With their lifeboats and firefighting equipment, workers felt confident about handling any problems. At 9:30 p.m. on July 6, 1988, everything on the rig seemed normal. But at 9:31, a piercing shriek rose from the sea beneath the platform and squealed through the entire length of the rig. Seconds later, a tremendous explosion tore the giant rig in two pieces. For the men off duty in their cabins, there was almost no chance of survival. The explosion had destroyed the crew's quarters, killing more than 100 men instantly. Workers outside on the deck watched in horror as the ball of fire rolled over the rig. Derek Ellington, a survivor, later recalled, 2/3 of that platform melted with the heat and disappeared. There was no time to find emergency equipment or lifeboats. The men still alive after the explosion had one chance at survival. They had to jump 200 feet into the icy North Sea. It was fry or die, said Superintendent Andy Moken, so I jumped. Even the emergency ship Thamos could not put out the raging fire. The continuing explosions forced the ship to turn away from the rig to keep from catching fire. But rescuers did try to save the men floundering in the cold sea. 28 ships arrived at the disaster, including an international naval force. Air Force planes and helicopters also joined the mission. Rescue pilot Patrick Thurkel later described the scene on oil platform. People were just running out onto the deck and leaping for their lives into the water. Tony Sinnott was one of the men pulled from the water. When he was safely on a rescue boat, he looked back at the burning rig. It was as if the platform had been hit by an atom bomb, he said. Sinnott thought he saw a few men standing on the platform's helicopter deck. They seemed to be waving, he said. Then the deck keeled over and the men disappeared. Rescue workers had a deadly task, and some gave up their lives in the effort. The tugboat Sandhaven sent out a small rowboat to pick up survivors in the water. 4 brave crew members went directly under the burning rig to rescue 6 men. The boat suddenly caught fire. It exploded moments later, killing 9 men. 166 people were killed in the disaster, making it the worst offshore oil accident in history. But rescuers did manage to save 64 men. Although most survivors had jumped into the sea, many suffered only minor injuries. The cold waters of the North Sea turned out to be the best defense against the flames. Oil experts believe that the explosion was probably caused by a natural gas leak. Gas pressure may have created the shriek that squealed through the rig. Gas explosions can be sudden and unpredictable. As people in Great Britain mourned the tragedy, researchers began to study ways to avoid future problems. Roger Lyons, a union official, represented the oil workers. He believed worker safety had not been taken seriously. Lyons asked the government and the oil industry to make worker safety their first priority in the future. Workers on other offshore oil platforms also believed their lives were in danger. After the Piper Alpha explosion, more than 100 British workers left their jobs on oil rigs. All these workers had been trained to handle disasters, but they knew that training had not saved the lives of the men on the Piper Alpha. Danger is a way of life in the oil business. There have been accidents on platforms and in refineries. Tankers have run aground and spilled oil into the sea, and some people think it may never be possible to avoid accidents. In the words of political leader Neil Kinnock, the disaster on the Piper Alpha is an awful reminder of the human price of oil.